You're watching Experience Comic Culture and Sales, streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
What's up, the internet? How's it going? It's producer Kyle coming to you live from La Bat Cave. My whole family is on vacation except for me, so rather than have to go to my office so I can be loud during the show, I'm able to do it from my own home, which is super exciting because it means when I need a bottle of water, I could go just like there instead of having to go to another room to get into a fridge to get a bottle of water and then rush back. It's like right there. So nice. Today's kind of a loose, kind of an open format show. It's going to be Bronze is going to give us a recap of Washington State SummerCon, which I saw a lot of great posts from him and others who were there. I was going to go to Origins Game Fair, but I opted not to, and in fact hung out with a 2.5-year-old for 3 days. So we could definitely talk about which monster trucks are the fastest monster trucks that Hot Wheels has put out, because that was basically 3 days for me. Or we could talk about how today I watched all of seasons 2 and most of season 3 of Boy Meets World, and how really Adam Scott from Parks and Rec and Severance had maybe the greatest run on that show ever. But none of you want to hear me talk anymore because our view numbers have gone dramatically down since I started talking about Boy Meets World. And so, maybe we'll skip that one. But this is Devil's Advocates, and you're watching us right now.
Hey.
Hello.
How's it going, Kyle?
This lighting is not as good on my beard.
Yeah, I mean, I do. There's something compositionally I like about the angle and the setup, but yeah, probably a little lighting tweak might help.
Yeah, that's a problem when you buy, I think, Lowe's ceiling fans. Not really designed for this kind of work.
You should get the YouTuber light ceiling fans at Lowe's. I hear those are pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Right. Pro streamer.
Right. Well, at the office, I've got, a couple of soft boxes and some more direct stuff that I use to kind of handle it. But
yeah.
John Stout, we did know that, and it was a mistake that will be corrected in the strongest possible terms to the person who does the scheduling.
Sorry about that, John.
AKA me. But I clicked the wrong little box. Don't know what to say.
There's a lot of dials and switches.
There really is, man. So, Washington State SummerCon.
Washington State SummerCon. Washington SummerCon in Puyallup, Washington, outside Tacoma, outside Seattle, for those that still don't know where I'm talking about, which is fine. Yeah, so, and by the way, John Stout, got a chance to meet John at the con, so that was excellent meeting you. Your suit game was on point. I'm sorry Steranko gave you a hard time about it, but he was wearing this awesome purple suit with like bat logos all over it, and he had a matching hat and a tie. It was amazing. Nice. So I loved it. It was really awesome. Yeah, it was a very interesting show, very cool show. I was there for all of Saturday. Got there slightly later than I intended, so the show had already opened up. But parking was great. Getting into the venue was a breeze. The setup was really awesome because the way that Washington SummerCon set up there at the fairgrounds, you have one large hall, and then you have two separate halls there's basically like an outside, promenade's probably the correct word for that, I think, or whatever, where you can easily leave the floor, go outside, but still be in the venue and not have to check back in and check out. Yeah, the National Guard set up there with Blackhawks and artillery and all kinds of cool vehicles, and they were doing demos. I mean, these are real vehicles too. They actually flew the helicopter in and flew it out at the end of the show. And then they had a giant separate hall for like the mega, Star Trek, because Jonathan Frakes was there, LeVar Burton, Marina Sirtis, a huge chunk of the Next Generation cast, and they had Grant Gustin from The Flash was there. They had Giancarlo Esposito, a bunch of, Vincent D'Onofrio was there, a bunch of good celebrities. So they had that all separated out, which is awesome because it didn't interfere with everything going on. Now, the signings happened at the end of the main hall, but since it was all on one end, it it still kind of separated it out from the show floor. Good turnout. I heard a number I'm skeptical of. I heard 50,000 people went over the course of the 3 days. It might have been less than that, but I heard that from a vendor that is a local vendor. I think he would probably know. And that's an awesome turnout. They said it was their biggest turnout ever. Had a lot of great comic creators there. If you've been following me on social media, like I mentioned, Steranko was there, Marv Wolfman, Larry Hama, Mark Wade was there, Charles Soule, Ryan Brown, John Beatty. I'm forgetting like 10 probably, but a pretty good lineup of creators as well. You had several Northwest YouTubers there mucking up the place and kind of disturbing the public. But it was a good show. And I did a little bit of everything. I did a little bit of the signings, a lot of shopping, tons of walking around looking at stuff, and found some interesting stuff that we can talk about a little later on too.
Nice. Did you happen to run into my friend and huge influence and sometimes nemesis, but it really just depends on how much Verners there is to go around, Ming Chen?
I saw him. I didn't run into him. No.
He was there. He sends me a picture of it was him and Ming Na Wen and Paul Sung Hyung
Mhm.
Lee, who played. He was in Mandalorian, but he was also in Kim's Convenience, which was a show I loved.
Yeah.
And the Ming Na Wen and Paul both had directed by Dave Filoni or directed by Jon Favreau T-shirts.
Yeah. Well, he had a directed by Dave Filoni, and then she had the Jon Favreau one, I think.
I think they both had. They had, yeah,
Something like that. It was great.
And then Ming sends me the photo of them and goes, "Can you Photoshop in a T-shirt that says something like directed by Kevin Smith?" And I sent him back a photo that said directed by not Dave Filoni.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, he liked it, so it was good. It worked out, It's always fun to see my friends go to a convention that I don't go to.
Right.
Because there's always stuff that it's like, okay, I want to know more about this thing, or okay, tell me about that moment.
Yeah.
And so you posted and then I commented, tell me, I don't want to bury the lead. I don't want to faff around about it. Tell us about your Larry Hama experience.
Yeah. So, I get to Artist Alley and I walked through the main strip of vendors, and then went pretty much straight to Artist Alley because I want to see what the lines look like, that kind of stuff. And that was kind of neat, actually. I would say the lines, except for Steranko, who had a healthy line because he loves to talk a lot, a la Chris Claremont, who's the same way. All the lines went really quick, and they never had, because you had a lot of the creators going to panels and coming back, which is really typical, but all the lines went pretty quick. Larry Hama had a few people in line. I went up to it and I was like, oh, this is gonna be awesome. This is the guy who I want to spend the most time with. It's the guy I want to hit first. There's like 3 people in line. This is gonna be easy. I get in line. The guy at the end of the line's like, yeah, he's going to a panel like in a few minutes, so I'm the end of the line. I was like, oh, okay. So I walk over to Marv Wolfman's line. At that time, I don't know if you're familiar with Travis, who's Comics with Bueller. He sees me. We've never met in person before this. He sees me and kind of nods at me, walks over to me. And I said, hey, how's it going? And he said, I'm going over to do the panel with Larry Hama and Tim Seeley. And I was like, I didn't know that he was moderating panels. And I said, oh, that's awesome. Do you mind if I walk over with you guys? So I got to walk over with Larry Hama and Tim Seeley to go over to their panel and kind of hang out up at the stage front, waiting for the showtime to start. And then, so my con experience was getting a chance to, absorb Larry Hama up close in person, going straight into a panel that was like a, hour-long panel of him and Tim Seeley interviewed, talking about their past, taking questions. I got to ask a question in the audience. Really fun thing for me is the very first question from the audience. You see Comics Bueller go, yeah, you, sir. And then I hear this voice and I'm like, I know that voice. I turn around and it's Chris Piers, aka Comic Tropes, who's one of my favorite YouTubers. He's one of the reasons I started a YouTube channel. I had him on my show a while ago. That was a huge experience for me. And I turned, I'm like, oh my God, it's so funny to hear that. And we get to hear, all the juicy gossip about Skybound and the new shared universe and the Transformers Energon universe. And by that I mean absolutely nothing, because he was sworn to NDA and would not talk about it at all. So all we know is he's writing issue 301, continuing the story he's been telling. That's all we know. But I got to hear tons of awesome answers about questions about the classic run, about other stuff he's done, about his acting career, all kinds of interesting stuff. And then right from there, went right back to his booth and got him to sign stuff, got to talk to him a little bit. I shot my shot to try to see if I could get him to come on my show, which would have been a very important highlight for me. He was very polite, told me, I think I've answered every question that anybody wants to ask me over and over and over again 1,000 times. So he politely declined. It was just too bad. I feel like I could have put a unique spin on it.
We'll work on that.
I mean, I know people.
He doesn't have something coming out that very soon will no longer be behind the NDA wall.
Exactly.
Talk to him about.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's kind of where the angle I was trying to take. But at the same time, not trying to be a jerk and just sit there and talk too long to a guy who was clearly trying to work on sketches and trying to, do autographs. I also know a lot of people that have interviewed him, so I can reach back out through those channels too. I think maybe and kind of elevate myself above just random guy at a con, which is how I came off. What's that?
I'll send him an email.
Yeah,
that's easy. And it's funny too. Like, there are those moments that you have at conventions where it's like, don't meet your heroes, because you don't know. Part of it is you don't know what they're going through, right?
Mm-hmm.
I tell this story all the time about the first time I met Neil Adams was a great experience, right? We talked about that Cosmos show when Neil deGrasse Tyson was doing it and never talked about comics. The second time I met him was a bad experience. And I don't talk about that one, but I know now that it was because he had several sketches he had to do, and he was working on a project, and he was on deadline. And it was just that the convention, while not an inconvenience, was an inconvenience.
Yeah.
And so he couldn't work on, he didn't want to sketch while you were talking to him. He wanted to give you his full attention. So anytime he had to talk to somebody, he was not intentionally being short, but he was just trying to be expeditious.
Right.
And I feel like that's what a lot of these guys do when you meet them. Like when you have your Larry Hama say, oh, well, I feel like everybody's already asked me every question I could possibly answer. Or, Nick tells a story all the time about George Perez saying that if you pitch me a script and then years from now I do a script that's similar, you'll be angry at me or whatever. Like, that's just his way of saying, I got other stuff to worry about. You know what I mean? Like, it's this weird sort of don't meet your heroes, but you got to meet your heroes kind of moment.
Yeah.
And I feel like
I have that feeling
Larry
too.
handled himself really well in that situation.
100%. And I mean, luckily, having the opportunity to be I'll say a modest audience, maybe 30 people or so. I was able to ask, a couple questions and like I asked for my question, I wanted to know, hey, you wrote this classic stuff from the adaptation from Hasbro, from the toy line. Did they ever come to you with a vehicle or a figure that you thought was too wild, just out of control, too zany for your storylines? And did they, how did you handle that? And he actually said he never had a conflict with Hasbro in terms of having to step in and say, I'm not going to, use this vehicle. I know from other stories he's told that he's definitely tweaked a couple of the things to kind of sideline their usage. But it was a very diplomatic answer to that question as well. He also mentioned that he never had Hasbro tell him no on anything that he wanted to do, which is one of my favorite moments in G.I. Joe. And I think it's a very important moment. Is there's the storyline after, I think it's like issues 107 through like 110 or so, where you have several GI Joes die. And knowing, without him saying it, that Hasbro didn't say no to that or have any objections or anything like that is really cool, because that's a seminal moment where you have these characters in a line where you would think like, nah, nobody ever dies, right? It's just like the TV show where you always see the parachute when a plane blows up.
Right. Or, they're clearly being shot at.
Right.
Like, I didn't realize the GI Joe were fighting the stormtroopers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then to have, especially Mr. Hama being a veteran, knowing that he's based many of these characters around people in his life, I think that means a lot from him, and I'm glad that story got told. It's one of the things I would love to dive into him is kind of some of the impetus behind that story. But that's a phenomenal moment. Did get to learn, just all kinds of cool things from him. The origin of the Dreadnoks, I've heard that story before, but to have him 5 feet in front of me telling it is awesome. Originally, they were going to be basically fuzzy teddy bear Ewok style creatures because Return of the Jedi was big at that time, and that's where he said no. That's kind of what led into that answer. He said, like, I'll do the Dreadnoks thing you want to do, but I'm going to do it differently. And instead we got Aussie biker gang drinking grape soda and eating powdered donuts. So it was just an amazing moment
there. Still some weird choices. All right. So I knew Larry Hama was a big hey, what's up, Bueller?
Hey, how's it going?
I know Larry Hama was a big kind of touch point for you at the show. What else?
Huge.
And don't say meeting comics with Bueller because he's here. It was, but don't say it because he's here.
Well, I'll give the diplomatic answer there. It was really fun to meet up with several other YouTubers. We got a group photo of a few of us. I saw some other people over the course of the show. This was the first time I ever went to a show and had people, say they knew who I was and say they were fans of the show, outside of people like, I knew I was already meeting them at the show. So that was really cool and flattering. I would say that the other stuff to me that really stood out for me was meeting Marv Wolfman. I was a very brief interaction, but that was a very cool one that I'll remember for a long time. One of the best, most prolific writers from that era. And then I had a really fun interaction with Charles Soule and Ryan Brown too, that I'll never forget. So that was really fun. And the other thing is we did our War on Adult Comics stream, and Tim Seeley's name came up like, I don't know, a dozen times during that stream. So getting to relay that to him and then asking him if he'd want to, ever do an interview and talk about that kind of perspective from a creator about adult comics and kind of his unique views on things, and having him be really open to that was really awesome. So my favorite thing about going to cons these days are the people. I used to be looking for memorabilia, looking for comic books. That's still really fun. I'm not going to deny that. People watching, going out and checking out booths, I still love doing that. But the networking with people, to either have them come on the show, just to meet some of the people that have done an excellent job with these comic books that you've enjoyed. I'm an autograph person. I love getting autographs. I didn't do like any CGC or CBCS witnessing or anything like that, but I do love that. I was telling somebody earlier today, for me, that takes me back to being a kid, when the first time I went to a baseball card show where there were baseball card players. And I'm in Washington State. There were 2 Mariners at this show, and I was probably 8 years old, and having them sign my baseball cards, like, that was so cool to me. And I've liked that ever since. It's not just the autograph. It's not just having that and looking at it, because I can look at autographs all day, but it's that interaction. It's that meeting somebody. And I never tell creators where to sign. And I love watching, especially artists. Writers pick interesting places sometimes. But finding out where artists sign is always interesting to me, because they did the cover, figuring out where they think that belongs. That's awesome. That's
Bueller,
awesome.
when you met Jesse, did he just call you brother a whole lot? Like, I know everybody associates that with Hulk Hogan and Macho Man, but really that was before that. It was Jesse Ventura. Everybody was, look, brother. With Jesse, it was. Oh, anyway, I'm a huge
What?
wrestling nerd, so that's a thing for me.
And it's funny because I'm a big Predator fan, so I'm walking along and I didn't. Well, one thing I did not do, and I just generally don't do this at conventions, is I don't really go do the whole celebrity meeting thing. I did at my first convention I went to. I did a bunch of it with TV stars mostly, but it's just one of those things it's a much longer line. It's much more expensive. It's usually just a photo and an autograph. You usually don't get as much interaction with those people. So for me, it just isn't as cool. But I did walk down like the photo op lane, whatever you want to call it. And I wasn't paying attention to who's wearing. You just look over and there's Jesse Ventura, a few feet to your right. I'm not a big wrestling guy, but I'm like, oh my God, that's a sexual Tyrannosaurus right there. I mean, it's just one of those cool things that, that's where I saw Ming. It's where all the different people there. It was just so cool walking down and seeing that.
See, and that's the difference, like in the way I convention these days, right? Like I also don't celebrity.
Yeah.
Although at Motor City Comic Con I did, but it was one of those, who knows how many more chances I'll have to meet this person. So I need to.
Yeah.
And that was William Daniels. Right? Like, I have this rule, like, you got to be 90 before I'll stand in line to meet you or something. Like, I don't know that that's really the rule, but it's never been important to me to meet the celebrities.
Yeah.
But ironically, what's become fun is, I've spent enough time working with the View Askew guys and with, several other groups. So we wind up at the bar after the show, and that's where I meet the celebrities, right? I don't have an autograph from when I met Michael Dorn. I don't have an outgoing voicemail message or a selfie, but I have heard Michael Dorn sing karaoke. Right? Like, it's a whole different demon. Or a very drunken Donnie Cates singing the Monster Mash at Halloween karaoke. Like, those are my, it's like I've moved past, wanting to meet these people by waiting in line and move past you know what? If I'm meant to meet them, we'll meet up at the bar later.
I mean, I'd have to lug around a minigun, but it'd be worth it.
I think you can do it.
I think I can do it.
Yeah. No.
But 100%. I mean, that anytime, like for example, at this show, and I don't know what it is about. I've done this at concerts a lot, like big festival concerts, outdoor concerts. I'll be walking around and I'll see somebody from a band, and nobody recognizes them. Nobody is going up to them. And so in that situation, like if it's somebody that I feel like I'm not interrupting their personal life too much or something, I kind of low key go to him like, hey, and in this case at this show, it was Mark Wade. He's just walking around, nobody's talking to him, nobody's interrupting him or anything like that. And I said, hey, I've met him before at another con. I said, hey, I'd be really excited to get a selfie with you. Or is that something you're okay with? And he said, sure. And he was even polite enough to almost maybe half smile in that photo. But, I'm sure he was on his way to go get a sandwich or something like that. And that was very nice of him to do. I did the same thing with Brian Michael Bendis at another show. And sometimes you start up little conversations, kind of like what you're talking about. It's much more interesting to me to have that. Like I had that interaction with Travis Barker at a concert, and just having him kind of be a weirdo, like hanging out over a fence watching everybody, and I just like noticed this little head sticking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Travis Barker. So I just went over there, had a little conversation with him, and around the time that 15 other people noticed I was talking to him and who it was, that's when he split. But for that few minutes, I got to have a real conversation, not just I'm a big fan, which is also cool. I'm not demeaning that experience at all for people that enjoy that. I've done that plenty of times and enjoyed it, but it's way more cool to just, like you said, hang out, right?
Pat, is this comment a reference to me giving jazz cabbage to Ben Templesmith? Is that what this is? A real experience where you didn't have to stand in line?
I think I know what jazz cabbage is, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty sure I know.
The Devil's Lettuce.
Yeah. Okay.
We were Pat is one of the head honchos at Cherry Capital Comic Con, which is a
Okay.
small convention, especially compared to where you just were in northern Michigan, in Traverse City, Michigan. And the cool thing about the show is, one, it's very artist centric, right? There's half the room is vendors, half the room is artist alley. But every year they bring in 3 to 5 celebrities, but they're comic book celebrities. So like this year it was Freddie Williams, Ben Temple Smith, and their movie star celebrity was Martin Kleba, who you may know as the little person janitor from Scrubs, or the
Okay.
little person pirate from Pirates of the Caribbean, who's a voice in an upcoming Disney project. But that was their celebrity wall.
Right.
Like I was as famous as anybody they had there, except for those 3 people. That's a definite dig at a certain guest, Pat, and you know who that guest is. But
People are Googling now.
huh?
People are Googling now.
No, they're not. That's just an inside joke between Pat and I. But no, it's the thing I love about this show is after hours at the show, every night there's an event. So Friday night is a Steve Dillon Memorial Drink and Draw.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you're hanging out with the artists and stuff at a drink and draw. Saturday night this year was Cherry Capital Prom. So it's basically a drink and draw, but some people were dancing. And you get to see everybody then. And then Sunday night, they have for staff and volunteers, they have this dinner that they do. And that really is just an excuse to sit around and shoot the breeze with the people who are at the convention. So it's us sitting at a table, and it's usually the same people, but us sitting at a table and then, oh, well, there's so-and-so, let's go talk to them for a minute. Or I'm going to sit over here and watch AEW pay-per-view, and Daryl Banks is going to come up and nerd out because he's a wrestling fan and I'm a wrestling fan, and sit and talk to us about wrestling for a half an hour.
Yeah.
Like it turns into this much more relaxed and kind of cool atmosphere where you get to hang out. And that's something I always really appreciate about that show. I think a lot of times when you wait in line to meet someone, there's an expectation. They know how that interaction is going to go. You know how that interaction is going to go. When you can get with someone outside of that interaction, you can actually become more friends. You can, sort of meet them as a person, not as a product. And I think that's a big plus.
Yeah.
So
100%. And I mean, there's just so many, like there are a few celebrities that I would do the whole, pay photo op, wait in line. There's a handful that I would if I happen to be at the show and the timetable lined up. But for the most part, it's one of those things where, especially for actors and to some extent musicians, I'm a little more, I appreciate the characters more than the individual. A lot of times I try to separate those two things. I think maybe more than a lot of people in our culture do with the obsession we sort of have with celebrities. That's not to say there aren't people that I definitely have followed outside of their acting or whatever it might be. But I'm kind of the same way I am with creators. Like I think it's very interesting to talk to writers. And it's sometimes interesting to talk to artists, but artists can be a little bit more hard to kind of peel back the layers on, whereas writers are just gabby. They're willing to talk about their stuff. I feel like talking to a director would be a lot more fascinating to me than maybe meeting some of the actors, so.
Oh, for sure. I have one exception to the celebrity rule, and that's professional wrestlers. And that's only if I can get them to do their gimmick on or about me. So,
gotcha.
I have a picture of Scott Hall, Razor Ramon flicking a toothpick in my face. At the same convention the next year, Brutus the Barber Beefcake trimming my beard with the shears. Like, it's that kind of thing, right? If I can give a memory to my, if I can create a memory by standing in line. Yes, MJF buying a Tony Schiavone bobblehead from Tony Schiavone and then giving it to MJF to sign to watch him destroy it. Like, that is a thing that, that's a memory that's worth standing in line for. Meeting, for instance, Danhausen, who is a very popular wrestler right now, was nothing because that was just an interaction because he didn't break gimmick, as opposed to meeting him at the local comic shop where he shops that my friend owns.
Oh, interesting.
That's kind of the thing. Like, professional wrestlers, if I can get them to do their gimmick to me, if I could have got Danhausen to kick me in the face while I had a mouthful of other people's teeth, then maybe. But I wasn't in the mood. So, it makes for an interesting thing. So
Totally.
We need to take our first break. We've blown past that by like a half a mile here. So we're going to do that. And then we come back. You had some photos that you brought back that you wanted to discuss. And I think that would be a good time to open the phone lines. So we can open the phone lines right now. 567-318-6507 1-567-318-6507. You can call in and be on the show, and you can just ask us anything. We can just keep talking about Washington State Summerfest and SummerCon and the barbecuing that I went and did, or whatever the hell. But we'll be back in just a minute. But before we go, I want to mention something, and Jay's going to get pissed and try and take us off the air, and I don't care. Jay and Jenna, Jay, our producer, and his wife Jenna, who you know from being on the air all the time, had some storm damage from some tornadoes last week and have a GoFundMe going. We're all trying to help them out because I obviously can't go down there with a chainsaw and help them myself. So we need to help them be able to get things resolved. So I am putting the link for the GoFundMe in the chat. If you have some extra that you could donate, that would be lovely. If you do donate and I see it come up during the show, we'll give you a shout out here on the show. And we just really appreciate that kind of support for our team and from our community. You guys are always so great. I get it if you can't. No pressure. Just if you can, that would be great. So, Jay, while you're angry and cursing my name, why don't you go ahead and take us to breaks and focus on that rather than being angry at me?
To be continued. 3 little words that hold the secret to the next great story. 3 words that will thrill you, confound you, give life to new possibilities. Every variation of to be continued is a promise of adventure, a promise of excitement, a promise of unseen wonders and unexplored worlds. A promise that every issue you read makes you a part of a never-ending journey, and behind every page there will be an unopened door waiting for you. This story to be continued at your local comic book shop today. Visit comicshoplocator.com today.
You know how when you go to Comic-Con, after Comic-Con, you go to the hotel bar, and there's a whole bunch of people playing music and dancing, and you've got Pikachu and Lara Croft Tomb Raider doing the cha-cha slide just down from Deadpool and Batman and Wonder Woman? That's every Saturday night over on the Experience Twitch channel. Join Taji Beats for the EXP Dance Party, exclusively on Twitch, twitch.tv/the_EXP. Why was Princess Zelda sad after watching a bunch of YouTube videos? She couldn't find the link in the description. We'll stop if you subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's super easy. Click subscribe and click the bell when you do. And thanks for supporting the EXP.
Welcome back, everybody. We mentioned barbecue before the break, and before we get into our next segment, while you went away to convention, I will show you what I did. If you give me just a second to load the photos here.
He is doing this to torture me because he knows I just smelled barbecue in my neighborhood. My stomach is doing cartwheels.
It's super true, though.
Yeah, that's okay. I love being tortured with barbecue.
Yeah, I mean, there are worse ways to be tortured, right?
Yeah.
Let me see if I can add one more here. For whatever reason, it's not showing up. Oh, well. We won't show the donut picture.
Fair enough.
And Jay only cursed us a little bit. That's funny. So, chicken
Ooh, pretty.
and ribs.
Oh, very pretty.
So that's what I did this weekend.
So I'm gonna derail all conversation for 1 second to ask you about barbecue.
Mhm.
You do barbecue competitions, right? What is, if there is, what is your signature specialty when it comes to barbecuing, if you have one?
So when you do the kind of competition, there's several different kinds of barbecue competitions, right? There's the ones where you go, where it's like everybody can go and you can buy tickets, or you can go up to the places and then you vote for who has the best ribs or whatever, right? That isn't what we do.
Okay.
Then there's somewhere you just cook barbecue and then you present it to judges and talk to them about what you made, kind of like Chopped or whatever. That ain't what we do.
Okay.
There's the biggest organization in the world for barbecue competition is called the Kansas City Barbecue Society. And that is, you cook at every competition. You cook chicken, either wings, legs, thighs, something like that.
Okay.
Ribs, and they have to be pork ribs, so spares or baby back ribs. Pork, which is usually pork shoulder, pork butt, so pulled pork,
Yeah.
and then brisket. You have to close it off at all competitions.
Okay.
Cook all four. Our specialty has primarily been ribs and brisket. We're one of the top rib teams in the country, and we're one of the top brisket teams in our area.
Brisket's my absolute favorite.
Yeah, brisket's really good. The thing about it is that like brisket you get when you go to a restaurant also isn't what we're cooking. We're cooking like Wagyu brisket, and we're cooking not the part you want slices of. We're cooking the part that's all fatty, and you got to render the fat out and present that. It's a whole different kind of thing than what restaurant barbecue tastes like.
Interesting. Okay.
So
Cool.
You'll cook all night and most of the day to present the 6 perfect bites of barbecue.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's hundreds and $1,000 competition probably. If I did the math, I would be angry at how much we spend, but I don't do the math, so I don't care. But you'll bust your ass for 3 days to present 6 pieces of barbecue, like 6.
Wow.
And then it gets blind judged, and you have to, you find out how you did. So
Interesting. So at the competition, last question I'll ask.
Mhm.
At the competition, is there, like, when I think barbecue, it's not just the meats, which are obviously the spotlight, but are there other competitions for like the sides? Like,
some of the competitions have steak cooking competitions
okay.
that go with them. Others will have dessert. They're called ancillary categories. They're
All
not
right.
the categories that count towards grand champion, which is the big money prizes. They're
Gotcha.
just kind of other things for, here's an extra $150 that you won or whatever. Like
Cool.
this competition we went to this past weekend was only ribs and chicken wings. Like that was the scope of the entire contest. But they also had other things that they were, doing. So they had donuts, and it was at a dispensary, so marijuana infused food competition and like other kind of things that were happening.
That sounds cool.
It turns into a different thing, but I'll have to take some video at our next competition. Just the scope of it all is really impressive for something that most people don't even know exists.
I didn't really, I mean, I'm sure you think about just about any hobby or skill, there's probably a competition for it, but hadn't really occurred to me.
Mm-hmm.
But
competition comic book reading.
Perfect time of year to talk about it too. So
So you brought back some photos.
Yep. So
let me show. Explain what these are, and then we'll show them.
So I want to set the stage here with a short story about why this occurred to me and the follow up. I like to bring stuff back for the loved ones in my life when I go to a con. Those that can't go with me. Got a cool Pokemon Squishmallow for my daughter, and then my wife. I asked her, I was like, "What do you want me to bring back?" Because she wanted me to bring something back. I'm like, what do you actually want? Like, you don't really want a comic book. You're probably not going to want a lot of things that I think are cool. What's your thing you want? And she said, hey, I want something Wonder Woman related. You can kind of, take your pick on what that is. Give me something Wonder Woman related. And so in my head, I wanted to find like a print, like one of those, 11 by 17 prints of like something that's a little bit more unique than just kind of the art that I'm into. She's a little bit more of a classically trained artist. So I like to find different kind of unique things. So I'm looking around, and one of the booths that I walk by had some really different looking art that caught my eye for a second. And it's one of those things, and this is much like the topic that we're about to talk about. The more you looked at it, the stranger it got. And I had a suspicion that was later confirmed. I didn't realize there was a sign in front of the booth that said this for the image we're about to show. Do I need to share that, or are you on the?
Jay, you got it? So do you want to show the first one, which is the art?
Yeah, let's show the art.
All right.
If possible. There we go. So this was, this is very standard. If you just look at this really quickly and walk by it, this is pretty standard. Somebody has a bunch of prints behind them, a bunch lined up along the table, a few standing up. Sometimes they'll have metal prints, and sometimes they'll have different kind of treatments on them. And if you look closely on the top row on the left there's a Wonder Woman, like kind of a side profile shot. And it was a little bit more dark and a little bit more, gritty. And I was like, oh, that's a little different, a little unique. And I started looking more and more and more. I'm like, this doesn't look like one artist's work. And sure enough, and I reached out to the person who posted this on IG. I think they created an account just to post this stuff, which props to them for trying to do that. But this was stuff that was all visible to anybody that walked by at the con. The next picture we're going to show is what that little white sign says on the front there, which is that, and this is this person. They are a Midjourney and Photoshop AI artist. So this sits very strangely with me that there's a booth set up at a con now selling AI art. Where it gets even more complicated is the next image we'll show, which is specifically that Washington Summer Con, the way that they support it is that they will continue to support original art and the creators of original art. We will be prohibiting the sale of AI generated artwork created using sourced content that the seller does not hold legal rights to at our events. So there is some language and some verbiage there. It's possible, I think extremely unlikely, that this artist acquired the rights to use some of that, because that just does not happen for that type of art. And I would say it's 1,000,000 to 1 odds that that's possible.
Well, and if he did, he paid $1 million.
Exactly. Like DC characters. I mean, come on.
The rights to use those characters are not cheap.
No.
So if you're getting those rights, you're either doing it by spending a lot of money, or you're usurping the letter or the spirit of the law at the very least. And I know like retailers get access to some images of those characters to use for promotion of a retail store, and that's part of your contract with DC when you sign up with their distributor, that kind of stuff. But that doesn't allow you to make prints to sell at a convention.
Yeah. And this actually, and this is maybe a topic for another show or part of another topic for another show. There is kind of this interesting little gray area, as far as I'm aware of the legality for even, let's say you're a named artist, that is out there in the comic book world, and you're selling prints of comic book characters that you've drawn up. There could be some situations where maybe that's kind of a gray area as well, depending on the character and how close it is to the image that's represented in comic books, that kind of thing too. But the part about this that's interesting to me is, and I'm basically saying all that to say this person allegedly did this. I can't prove that they broke any law here or skirted the rules of the convention. However, it does appear that way. And the interesting part to me is, first off, I want to say that I really want to support Washington Summer Con. I think they did an amazing job. I am in no way affiliated with them at all. I asked if I could get a press badge to the show. Full disclosure, they said they don't give out press badges because they're not a big enough convention, which is an awesome answer. I totally am okay with that. Personally, I do think they should allow them in, but I can respect the opinion. That's neither here nor there. And I want to see this convention continue to grow and be popular. We need another good one here in the Northwest besides Emerald City Comic Con and Rose City Comic Con. All that said, I did not see many people at all walking around that were evidently event staff. There may have been plainclothes individuals walking around, but most of the staff I saw had these certain kind of shirts on, and I could identify them. And I'm usually pretty good about spotting stuff like that. And I barely saw anyone the entire time. So it made me wonder how much vetting is going on for what can be sold at the show. And there's,
Well, and that's the question, right? Like,
yeah,
that person just put I'm a digital artist, and they're like, okay, digital artist. You know, well, I'll start here and we'll come back to kind of where you're thinking. I don't buy prints, period. I'll buy a print if I'm standing at Neil Adams' table. When I was standing at Neil Adams' table, I would buy a Neil Adams print. Right? Like, these are works of art that this person has created. I know this work of art. I'll buy this print.
sure.
Right? I've talked to too many vendors at conventions, being a vendor, who are, well, I'm not the artist. I just represent the artist, or I just bought these images from an artist I know. And now I travel around to conventions with a 25-foot wall of prints. I don't know. I will save my money and buy real art. And
Yeah.
that's not to say prints aren't real art. That's not what I mean. But I will save my money and spend it on less stuff that I can watch the person draw in front of me, or that I can hand them a blank sheet of paper at the beginning of the convention and come back and it's a piece of art later, than buying a print.
Okay.
And again, I'll buy prints from creators. Like, I have a friend who right now, he's the new artist on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Well, he has permission from his publishers to sell prints of his colored versions of his covers. Great. I can't afford the cover art. Bang, I'll buy the print because I love the cover art.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I stand. Part of this to me is just so brazen that I can't wrap my brain around it, right? Putting on your table, I use AI art.
Not only like this, I use Midjourney, which is a program I think a lot of people are familiar with, and it's how that works. It's just, hey, we're mashing up two images here.
Right. And that's like saying, hey, I'm going to rob this bank, but then I'm going to make a deposit after because I'm going to Photoshop it. I'm going to use Midjourney and then Photoshop to make it look better. Okay, I'm going to rob a bank, but I'm going to make a deposit after. Like, really, bro? Like, it's still theft.
Yeah.
It's still dirty pool. Now, I have one AI exception. We talked about this when I talked about AI on the show, on my old show. There are artists like Brian Haberlin who are building their own AI constructs, feeding it only their work, and using it for only their purposes. Right? Like, there can certainly be a place for AI.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to be so substantially reined in from the way it exists now for it to make it palatable. And Brian is an example of, hey, I have this ability because I'm Brian Haberlin and I'm super smart like that, to build what I need for me and to make it do it my way. And I can accept that. This does not seem like that.
No, and I think it's very interesting. I mean, obviously, AI, especially when it relates to creators and artists right now, is a hot button issue, and for good reason. It's a emergent technology. We need to have some of these conversations around this stuff to keep things moral and in check, and make sure that there's a consensus on what people feel is acceptable and what's not acceptable. I think it's very interesting. The context for me for this that really is fascinating is what you said. It's so brazen and it's at a show. The other one is just kind of how on the public mind for comic books AI is right now because of Secret Invasion. If you're not familiar with Secret Invasion, I promise this isn't any kind of real spoiler for the show at all. There is a intro to that show that has apparently partially used AI. We don't really know the full extent of that process yet, as far as I can tell. I don't know if it was completely generated that way or if that was a partial effect that was used to generate that. But essentially, it's a just the opening credits sequence to intro the show. And people, especially artists and creators, who have taken a very firm stance against AI usage, the vast majority of them have kind of lampooned that and made sure to call it out, which I give them props for doing because that's their opinion on that. I will point out that I think using AI in something like a VFX kind of situation or content creation is a little bit different. And I want to know how that was used before I blast a show for using that. The example I gave is not everyone, it's the internet. I can't say everyone. Most people loved the Two Towers, the Lord of the Rings movie. Well, guess what? A lot of those little soldiers fighting in that movie at Helm's Deep and all those places are AI movement generated. And you have to be careful where you draw the line. I definitely draw the line. I never want to go buy a comic book that has a complete Mid-Journey AI generated cover, for example. That's my line. That's where I completely will not support that, because I don't want that work taken away from talented and created art and creating artists out there. But I also would possibly be willing to support an artist like you're talking about that is using AI to further their work in a way that is unique to them.
Right. So CGI and VFX are different to me than AI. You want to talk about the Two Towers. I've never seen the movie, but all the little guy fighting, that's something that was programmed into a computer and run through a CGI generator. Not necessarily AI, but that's machine learning, right? Which is part of this AI construct that is becoming so readily available, right?
Yeah.
Adobe has for years had machine learning enabled on all of its Creative Cloud software. And part of that is it learns over time through your keystrokes what tools are vital to the work you're doing and what tools aren't. And so what Adobe will do is it will change the layouts of the workspace.
Yeah.
Right. Based on that machine learned kind of, these are the buttons that actually matter. That, to me, is different than using AI to say, I want a photo of Wonder Woman looking as though she were the Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now you don't know where you're pulling all this data from. So it's a different thing. And I will not support, and this has kind of been my rule. I won't see a movie where they don't list the VFX studios and VFX creators. Period.
Yeah.
Like, as someone who's done VFX and who does animation and who does this kind of stuff all the time, I won't watch them. It's the same reason I won't watch anything on the Max app now, because the way they change the way the creators are listed.
Oh,
right?
interesting.
It's because that's the field I'm in, and like the guilds I'm a member of, these kind of things. I have to find my line and draw it, right? So for me in movies, seeing the CGI and seeing how things go is super important that it's not AI, because that's thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs On a movie like we went and saw The Flash.
Mm-hmm.
The CGI and the VFX on that movie was thousands of people. Not just a few, but thousands. And that work could all be done using AI if you were willing to, do that. But I don't want to see thousands of people lose their jobs. And that's why the WGA is on strike. It's why so many people in the DGA are voting against the ratification of the DGA deal. It's why, SAG-AFTRA is going to have a big problem, with their deal because they want to ban AI for actors' likenesses. There's going to be a big problem in Hollywood with this. And I think the easy way to get ahead of it in the comic book business is just to say there's no place for AI in our business unless it meets X, Y, and Z rules.
Yeah.
Right? It's like Asimov's laws of robotics or whatever. The iRobot stuff. We have to come up with rules for the AI and how it's going to be allowed to exist in our business. And then when people choose not to do it, we're going to have to say, okay, that's the fringe. And that can exist over there on the fringe. But in the industry, we don't like it. We don't accept it. Or we have to say, okay, we do accept it and be okay with whatever comes out of that. Figure drawing shared. So when I was in art school, this is one of my greatest. I gave the commencement speech in my art school, and I used this quote, and I said, great artists borrow, or good artists borrow, great artists steal, but the real true greats change the game so much there's no one to steal from. And that's the problem of AI, really, is that it takes innovation and says, screw that, flushes it down the toilet, and there's nothing left. George Perez couldn't steal from other artists because he was creating the kind of art that everyone else wanted to steal. John Romita Sr. couldn't steal from other artists because he was creating it. He was changing the game. Pablo Picasso, Vincent van Gogh, the greats can't steal. And that's the truth. So he also said the only problem I have with AI art is when the artist does not state that X art is AI. And, that's a fair way to kind of treat it right now. I don't mind that thing, right? Like the guy put on his table, I use Midjourney.
Yep.
If you have a problem with that, then at that point, he has disclosed to you how he does his thing. You have every right at that moment to walk away. It's not like he sold you a bill of goods and then you found out it was AI. He told you, and then you had the opportunity to walk away, which I think is an important part, right? Disclosure is huge.
Yeah. Speaking of which, actually, I there's one element of the story I do want to make sure I bring up. The person, when I walked by that booth and I saw something was strange and I kind of just kept walking, the reason why is because that person was not at the booth. There was a big sign over the chair, like back in 15 minutes, or I can't remember what it said exactly. The funny part is if that hadn't been there and there'd been somebody there, I probably would have talked to this person. And in fact, may have even recorded that interaction because that's the kind of person I am. I'm like, hey, we're at the con here. You're holding this booth. Tell me what your thought process is here. What do you think?
Yeah.
Which would have been fantastic. Unfortunately, because he wasn't there, I never kind of made those connections until after I got home. And man, it is such a fascinating thing. And another, shout out to the person that posted this. Again, they created an IG account with 3 images on it, and the 3 images are the ones that we've shared earlier. So I think they're creating it just to expose that person. And I tried DMing that person, but 2 days later, no response. So I was kind of curious if they had any extra insight into what happened there. But it is fascinating. It's brazen, like you said. That's a great way to put it. And it is something that we're going to have to address as a community going forward, and you bring up, guilds earlier. It is one of those things where there is this notion out there that if we had comic creator guilds, it would help protect artists a lot more. And when I say artists, I mean writers and illustrators. And it's something that we could include things like this, and we can include things like getting their fair earnings from creators, created characters being portrayed on screen, or storylines being portrayed on screen, things along those lines. And it speaks to the problem, which was we got to take care of our artists, or guess what? They're not going to want to make more comic books for us to read.
Right. I know the WGA is interested and has been interested in adding a wing of the WGA that is non-television film writers. So it's okay if you're a novelist, if you're, we will represent you in this regard. I don't know where that stands for artists. And I know that the comic industry has traditionally been pretty opposed to that.
Oh, yeah.
I remember not that long ago, Jim Valentino floated the idea, and the yelling and screaming that happened was insane. It's such a weird spot to be in. And I'm reading figure drawings comment here.
Oh, sorry. I was highlighting it too. Yeah, it is a fresh technology. I think about it a lot like I think about when I was logging into my brand new Hotmail account in like 1992 or whatever, and you had the internet ahead of you. And look, I'll tell you, a lot of people of my age, where I'm kind of from that era that straddled pre-internet and post-internet, a lot of us pictured things turning out a lot differently for the internet and being this like amazing, useful resource. And then, but also it is this potentially dark and terrible place too, in some ways.
I'm just hearing Avenue Q in my head. The internet is for porn. Internet is for porn. Anyway.
And yeah, 100%. And so it is one of those things where, for all we know, we'll refine this technology to the point where, digital artists that work primarily digitally anyway, or even traditional artists, can scan their stuff in and then have, by their choice and by their settings and controls, clean up their backgrounds or their artwork, and it helps them work faster. And that's something that we accept.
Flatting for their colorists.
Yep.
Like, there's a lot of work that can be done by AI or machine learning, but again, we need to assign it its rules.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm not saying it needs to be regulated. Don't think I'm on that train, even though I do think it needs to be regulated. I think what we need to do is industry by industry say these are our rules for AI.
Mm-hmm.
I don't give a crap if General Motors uses AI to write its instructional manuals for how to set up your car radio. I could give a crap, right? I don't want that copywriter to lose their job, but I don't read the book anyway, right?
Yeah.
Who here actually goes through the book to read how to program their car radio?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because somebody we both know, and I won't say their name, but somebody we both know from our chats, their spouse does that work. And that is a very real concern right now for people in that line of work.
And I don't want the copywriters to lose their jobs, but at the same time, like, if General Motors says we want, or even, I'll give you an example of the experience. We have a chat function on our website that the first 2 or 3 steps of that chat function is Chat GPT generated. Like,
that's extremely common.
Right. I'm the only web admin we have. I don't have time to message back every person who tries to chat our website, especially the ones who are Russian spam bots. You want hot girl? Here, no, I don't. Bye. It's so it has.
And that's been commonplace for years.
Huh?
That's been commonplace for years.
Right.
Your Google customer service interaction, for example.
I'll be real honest. I was wildly uncomfortable. Like, wildly uncomfortable even setting that up on our website. Like, I just don't want it. But it's the only reasonable way to do that. You know, it's every industry has to come up with its guidelines.
Yeah,
And that's what I'm saying. Like,
I agree with that.
I don't get fired up. And Pat's like, we have a friend who would be put out by AI. Yes, absolutely. I'm not saying that they should use it, but I'm not saying they shouldn't. I can't write the rules for industries I'm not in. But for comics, I think the line has to be drawn at, you can't be here. I had a writer friend reach out to me and say, you know, I've been thinking about this AI thing, and I think for this writer who couldn't draw their way out of a paper bag, it'd be a great way to kind of do character design, to kind of send to their artist and be like, hey, this is sort of what I'm thinking. You know? And I said to them, I go, or you could just use words. You a writer, use words. And they're like, yeah, that works too.
Big guy, muscles, no
Right.
cape.
We have to look at the bright side. Before ChatGPT, wimpy nerds were forced to do other people's homework. Some of us got paid very well for that work.
They're taking our jobs too.
Right. Taking our jobs, man. I don't know. It's so weird. The thing I can't get past is how flagrant.
Well, and
I've suspected people of using AI, of using auto-generated images, I've seen guys, and I'm not calling anybody out, but I've seen people who sell t-shirts at conventions who I'm like, you clearly got that from VecDeezy and just modified it a little. That is not an original design. But you're selling t-shirts at this convention? How does that work? Right? So the brazenness of it is the thing that I just can't get past. And I don't put it on the convention. I don't put it on anybody for not stopping it. But at the same time, man, it seems like it's a really weird, slippery slope to be walking down.
yeah, it's one of those things where, like, it's interesting that, you know, I noticed this after the fact. I didn't really hear anybody else mentioning it, but could you imagine if this happened at like New York City Comic Con or something like that? Like, I feel like it would be on such a different stage right now. And so that's why I thought it was just a ripe topic for discussion. Something that I think it'll be fascinating as we see other people attempt this sort of thing, or the way that they're going to try to bring it into the community. It is becoming something that is an issue for sure. It's sneaking in.
It's true. Leonard says real world artists need to step their game up. I know creators that only hire artists outside of the US as it costs less than hiring someone in the country. Well, that's part of that though, is just cost of living, man. You can't pay an artist who lives in LA the same thing you can pay an artist who lives in Ohio. Just costs more. And while a lot of those artists are certainly worth their weight in gold that get hired from wherever they are, all artists are worth their weight. But you know, some places have better art programs in schools. Some places, you know, it's just, there's a number of factors that go into that part of it. And you're right. And John's right. There are publishers that do that too. But at the same time, that's a cost mechanism, not necessarily a skill mechanism. And it's not really an AI mechanism either. It's just a kind of there's a reason that when you call a 1-800 number to get customer service, most of those phone banks are outside the U.S. Cost of living other places is lower. You can pay people a lot less. It saves a lot of money for these companies. Is it right? No, I don't know, but it's the way it is. I would, let's put it this way. I would not, I wouldn't blame anybody for hiring Lucio Perillo or Mirka Andolfo or any of those people, right? I met a guy, his name was D-Raj, who was a wonderful painter. He died during COVID, but we met through ReedPop. Great painter in India who was only getting work because for this kind of work, if you had paid an American artist, they would have been $1 million paintings. Just the way it works. So,
Yeah, and I think Figure's latest comment, their comic book artists in general in the US don't make real money, but in Asia, yeah, look, the thrust of that is it goes to what I said earlier. We definitely need to take care of our creators if we value receiving amazing art, if we value receiving well-told stories. Look, it's already happened. There are already people who probably could be in comic books that chose to do other things with their career or avoid that part of the creative world because they know the money isn't as good as it could be. And think about some of the success we could have there. And I like a broken record, I'll beat this war drum all day long. If we want our hobby to be successful and have legs to it, look, the MCU is what it is. It's a huge juggernaut. It turned a lot of people's attention to comic books. We've proven that movies can do that. We've proven that, like Invincible, the success of Invincible, it's a show a lot of people care about, highlighted a great comic book. Well, we need more of those stories that are amazing, that are new, that are fresh, that, it doesn't have to be Hollywood. It's just a good example. Hollywood could take and then, shine a spotlight on and show creatives that that's a path to success and money as well. And find any kind of other way that we can get them involved. Otherwise, you are going to have to settle for mediocre art, mediocre stories. It's something that frankly happened after the founding of Image. You saw a lot of other those creatives, they shifted the power to one direction. You saw a lot of mediocre artists and writers getting jobs. And luckily, you also saw some people who wouldn't have gotten their shot get a shot because of that. So there was a silver lining, and I think there could be a silver lining to some other, things we talked about with this topic, but we have to look for those silver linings and we have to ensure the safety of the hobby. That's how I view it. If we care about it.
There is some software out there. Figure Johnny said we need to get work rating program and spot when they're using ChatGPT. ChatGPT put it out there and made it available to schools and academic organizations where they can literally just scan it into ChatGPT and be like, yeah, we wrote this.
Yeah. And what Psycho Phil's saying as well. There's been software out there to spot plagiarism. And yeah, and
thank God I graduated high school before the days where you couldn't just copy and paste Wikipedia and hit auto summarize.
And then here's me. I didn't know you could do that. All those papers I wrote.
So, no, I think this AI thing is something that.
Let me tell you about a little company called Distillery.
Yeah, no kidding.
You might want to go back and check out. I think that was our first episode, wasn't it?
And then there's a couple. That was our first episode. And then there's a couple of other great things that we've done here. Jen King has interviewed Ram V, who's one of the founding members of Distillery.
Yep.
And Chip Mosier and David, whose last name I can never remember. Had them both on her Talking Shop show that's available on the Experience YouTube channel. You can check out. And you know what? Devil's Cut is coming soon. Maybe we'll have some of those guys on our show to talk about. Chip and David really did a great job of explaining the digital stuff that they're doing. And I think it'd be a really interesting place to have a debate for us on the digital side, because they've come up with a way where you can resell your digital comics.
And that's a fascinating talk about. It's very similar to this topic. There's early adopter is probably the wrong word for it, but it's an early technology and early marketplace that we need to explore.
It's something that the analogy I've made since we started the experience, because of what we're doing here being different than what Bronze does on his channel or what Bueller does on his channel or what other people do, is that you have to pave the road to get it to go where you want it to be. And so, like, Distillery is out there cutting down the trees to pave the road to get where the industry wants to be, which is where digital comics have some collectability and have some secondary value and some of this kind of stuff that give, and then creator incentive. Because every time you sell a Distillery digital comic, creator gets a taste. So every time that comic gets resold, that creator gets a royalty.
Yeah.
Like they're building a road to go where they want it to go. It doesn't exist yet. So we'll have to see how it goes.
100%. Now that would be a great conversation to have. 100%.
Yeah.
Cool.
So dope.
Yeah.
So does anybody have? We've gone long, and I'm very hungry, and Bronze is very hungry.
This is true.
So does anybody have one question that they can throw into chat that we can talk about? Because this was supposed to be an AMA, and we never got asked anything.
And then while we're waiting for the lag and somebody to type something out, if they do have a question, which by all means, keep doing it. Don't worry. I will say that I rarely do this, but I'm going to have a video coming out tomorrow that I think will be very interesting for people to watch on the topic of scammers and a very big scam that is about to get huge attention. So keep your eyes peeled on my channel. I am terrible at self-promotion. I never do this, but that's one that I do want people to check out because I want you to protect yourself against scams out there.
Figure drawing, I could speak to this a little bit. He does, but oftentimes what's happened is that either the publishers that he's worked with aren't in a position to go back to it, or he doesn't feel like he's ready to tell the next part of the story. So, have you enjoyed the first season of The Bear on Hulu? Season 2 is out now. Bronze, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I watched The Bear season 1. I have not watched any of season 2 at all. I will say that it is very reminiscent to me of I forget the name of the director, but he's done a couple films now. The most popular is Uncut Gems. And the feeling that happens is the best way I can describe it is like secondhand anxiety. And that show is very interesting at doing that.
It's Josh Safdie, by the way.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And there's another movie called Good Time that he did with Robert Pattinson that is also very similar to that. It's also interesting. Robert Pattinson, that was the first time that I thought he could do Batman because I saw a little bit more of his range than I had before. And that's just because I didn't have much exposure to him as an actor. And turns out he did a good job in the Batman with that character, at least the way it was portrayed. But anyways, yeah, it's a very good show. Have to agree. Looks like a lot of people enjoy that one. It's a very good show. I love the main actor whose name I need to learn now, and I am actually watching Shameless, which he is also in, and he does a fantastic job in that too. So, nothing but love for me on that show. How about you? Have you watched it, Kyle?
I watched season 1, and Jeremy Allen White, who's the lead actor, is fantastic in it. And believe it or not, the girl who plays Sydney, I don't know how to say her name, was on Abbott Elementary and was fantastic as I don't know how to say her name either. Kenyatta Brunson, the lead actor, as her sister. Fantastic. Okay. So here's my deal on The Bear. Season 1 of The Bear gave me so much anxiety. It took me 2 months to watch it. And it was all out so it could be binged. Like, it took me a long time to watch it. I loved it. But I also work with some of the people I work with. And so I was seeing parallels to Richie and some of the other characters and people in my life, which was giving me all kinds of problems. The therapist was not a fan of me watching the show. It was the whole thing. I'm rewatching it now with my business partner and best friend.
Okay.
With the intent of starting season 2. But out of solidarity with the WGA, I'm not watching any new shows on any streaming services until their deals are settled. Even if it was done before the strike happened, which this was, I'm not watching anything that wasn't canceled before the writer strike started.
Got it.
So it's very tough for me right now watching television.
Yeah, that would be difficult. Luckily, there's a giant backlog of amazing TV out there that you can expose yourself to, maybe. But
right, if you are a fan of Josh Safdie, there is a thing called Heaven Knows What, which is I think it technically is classified as a short. It's only 90 minutes. So it's a full-length movie, but it's not a full-length movie where he's very good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, he directed very good, called heaven knows what.
And just a quick little shout out here near the end of the show. Copper Age Babe is in here. That is my wife, for those of you that don't know, and it's very awesome. And she is right. Silo is an amazing show that I also recommend for when the strike ends and you're ready to start a new show. If you haven't started that one, that's another one I highly recommend as well.
Yeah, I'm stuck watching like the Bob Newhart show from the 70s and Boy Meets World. Like, it's been real tough.
It's so funny hearing you talk about Boy Meets World. Like that's just a blast from the past. I mean, there's a newer show,
Girl Meets World.
Yeah, I haven't seen any of that.
Way better than it has any right to be. It got canceled before the pandemic, but
there you go. So could start that one. Oh my gosh, now we're talking about Red Dwarf in chat. Oh my gosh, guys, you're gonna get me off topic here big time.
Did not like Red Dwarf. Hot take. Did not
what?
Like Red Dwarf. Nope.
See, okay, next episode of Devil's Advocates. Red Dwarf is amazing. Debate.
I think part of it though was just the time in my life when I watched Red Dwarf.
Sure, that makes
if I went back and watched it again, I probably would dig it.
Yeah, if you don't like British humor, avoid that show.
I love British humor, but I would just rather watch Faulty Towers than Red Dwarf. Like, my British humor is very niche. It's more, Tim and Eric, Noel Fielding kind of absurdist British comedy. So Red Dwarf should hit me, but it just didn't.
Well, I'm a Smeghead, so I absolutely will sign up for that show and recommend it heartily to anybody who wants to expand their horizons. By the way, shout out to PBS and public broadcasting, because that's how I got exposed to that show back before the internet was a fun thing you could do with that. So
that's how awesome. I learned about Monty Python.
Yep. Well, we got the majority of the questions answered here, and you got a couple hungry panelists here. So quick reminder, we do have a link up on the EXP website. If you want to suggest future topics to have Kyle and myself debate, such as Red Dwarf or many other things, you could go there and recommend those ideas to us, and we could talk about them in a future show. And we'll give you a little shout out for doing that too, because we love hearing what you guys want us to talk about. Because that means you're probably going to be more likely to want to come here and hear us talk about it. So definitely remember to do that. We do have a link in the chat right now you can check out. And we enjoyed having you guys spend the time with us and recapping a con and talking about all these fun topics. And we can't wait to talk to you in the next episode.
Absolutely. See everybody next time.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.